I've been selling them, and we've got 36 vineyards in Ramona now, so it's starting to pay a little bit of attention. But Willie and Venice are here. They drove all the way from Vegas. Let's give them a welcome. Okay, today we have Rick Elkin, the author of 4 books. Listen to the titles: The Neighbor, Trump's Reckoning, Turn Right at Lost, and The Illusion of Knowledge. This gentleman was impacted by 9/11 and became a patriot to the max. He's written these 4 books, and we're honored to have him here today. Please welcome Rick Elkin.
Everybody here for having me today, gives me a chance to pontificate. My wife told me this is what I should do for a living. But anyway, I appreciate the opportunity to be here before you guys today and talk a little bit about my books. I'm going to talk about hijacking. I know you're kind of looking at me like, what? How's that have anything to do with this? But it does, and I'll tell you why. I was doing a podcast the other day, and the host asked me, is there a theme amongst all of your books? And, you know, it took me back.
You get my good side.
I never really thought about that. And then I said, yeah, actually there is. And I didn't have that in mind when I wrote it. But in hindsight, I can see there is. So before I talk about my latest book, The Illusion of Knowledge, let me tell you a little bit about me and how I got here before you today. I spent the first half of my business career in the ski industry. I won't get into that, but my family was very much involved in that, and after I got out of college, I was a little bit lost, didn't know what to do with myself, and you know how it goes. You get jobs based on who you know, not what you know. And I knew some people in the ski business, so I got into that. And I spent about 15 years doing that, and eventually moved to Rancho Bernardo to open my own ski shop. Now, I won't tell you what a dumb idea that was, but anyway, when that failed during the Carter administration, we couldn't get any gas, so we couldn't drive to the ski resorts. We didn't have any snow, and interest rates were about 20%. So it was pretty much an uphill battle. And after struggling for about 3 years to do that, I finally just folded the tent. And a friend of a friend got me in the building business. I started selling cabinets for cabinet shops to builders up and down the I-15 corridor, which at the time was just a booming market. And so I ended up spending 30 years doing that. And in about 2010, after the Great Recession, I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and we were doing $150 million a year in business in California, although we had been. And by 2010, that had dropped to about $25 million, and the company just decided, we're out of here. They closed the shop, laid everybody off, and part of the reason for that was the atmosphere in California was anti-business, and they could see it coming, and they were being sued left and right, and the building industry had collapsed. And so they just walked away, and they've never come back. And so at 60 years old, I don't have a job, and I didn't think there was really much hope for me to go back into that business, so I needed to reinvent myself. And I started blogging, painting, and doing all the kinds of things I used to do when I was in college. I was very creative. And in 2012, I lived in Escondido, and the Escondido Country Club went under. A lot of you may know a little bit about that. I lived in the Escondido Country Club neighborhood, and suddenly one day we were told that it had been sold out of bankruptcy, and that the new owner was going to close it and build houses. And we all looked at each other and said, that ain't going to happen. And I was in the building business, and I'm pro-builder. I believe we need to build houses for our kids. That if we just stop building houses, where are they going to live? It's not fair for us to have had our, great life here in San Diego or wherever if we don't provide for our kids to have the same opportunity. So I'm very pro-builder, but the problem with this situation was that he wanted to take 110 acres that winds through the neighborhood, and most of the people who live there had paid a premium to live on a golf course. And they also had their housing, their lots minimized because they were in front of the golf course. So they had traded the zoning for that kind of a situation so they could put the golf course in. This was back in 1963. So the country club was hurting. It was, post Great Recession. A lot of people were out of work. The economy tanked. There was a tremendous shortage of water, and the country club was not right. So this guy from Beverly Hills comes in and happens to be the only guy to show up on the courthouse steps to buy the note. And he buys 110 acres in North San Diego County of flat land, simply located right next to 15 and 78 for $2.3 million. Now, if I didn't know it was going to sell for that much, I'd have written a check. That's $4,000 a lot. The lots in North San Diego County typically sell for about $300,000. So this guy was a flipper. He knew that if he could corner the property, get it entitled, he could flip it for millions. So anyway, 5 or 6 years later, not at that point, I decided I was going to monitor this whole thing and document it. So I started a blog called War on Escondido, and we fought for 6 years. And during that time, I decided it'd probably be a good idea to actually publish an ebook so that people in the future could look back and say, whatever happened to that community, because it's gone now. And it was a beautiful place to live, and it's a total wreck right now because we're in the middle of it being converted. And probably 10 or 15 years from now it'll be okay, but it's been a real trauma for those of us who live there. So that was my first book. And then around 2015, I was really annoyed with what was happening to our country. And part of that was, let me go back a second. I called that book The Neighborhood Hijacker, because I really believed what he had done was to come in and literally hijack the neighborhood by buying essentially one lot. It happened to be 110 acres in size, but it was one lot, and he wanted to completely remake the neighborhood in his own way, without anybody else having anything to say about it. To me, that's a hijack. So in 2015, I decided to write another book, and I was going to write about how the Obama administration had hijacked our country. Because it seemed to me that President Obama came in under disguise. Yes. He essentially said he was going to reconcile the races. He was going to fix the economy. He was going to settle the Middle East. He had solutions for everything. In fact, it didn't matter what it was. He had a solution for it. And I have to be honest with you, a lot of my Republican friends voted for him because they believed him. But once he got in office, he hijacked the country and he revealed who he really was. And so we went through 8 years of flying on this plane that was essentially flying into a mountain. The economy tanked. Everybody I knew was out of work. Everybody I knew, especially people my age. It was, in my mind, in my lifetime, it was the Great Depression. And I was thinking and wondering, where's the next Ronald Reagan? Is there such a thing? Because I had become a Republican when Ronald Reagan came along. Before that, I was a Carter man. I was a McGovern guy. In college, I was a long-haired, bearded, left-wing, anti-war, dope-smoking hippie. But after I lost my business during the Carter administration, I started to sober up. And then Ronald Reagan came along and changed my life. In fact, I thought it was kind of interesting to see what he said a minute ago in that preview about it's not that our liberal friends aren't intelligent, It's just that they know so much that isn't so. Well, isn't that the illusion of knowledge? So anyway, I'll tie that into my last book in a minute, but I want to go through the process. So my next book was called Turn Right at Lost, and I used the GPS. Everybody was into GPS at the time. We were starting to get them on our phones. I used that as sort of the theme throughout the book about all the different issues we were having in our country that Obama was not paying attention to while he was spending all his time dealing with social justice issues. The country was going into a mountain. So right before the 2016 election, I published that book, and in it I predicted that this guy who came down that escalator with the big blonde hairdo was going to win. And I based it on the idea that one of the things he said that really solidified it for me was he reduced the election to a contest. He said, we're going to win, and we're going to win, and we're going to win again, and we're going to win so much, you're going to say, Mr. Trump, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep winning like this. And I thought, you know, this is exactly what we need to hear. I'm tired of all this political malarkey and all these guys, the 16 Republicans up there blabbing on about policy and policy wonking and this and that and all the same promises that all the Republicans and the Democrats had been making for years, none of which ever came true. They talked about balancing the budget. You know, they talked about settling the Middle East. Meantime, terrorism was going crazy. Every night we were seeing somebody's head get cut off on television. So when Trump reduced it to a contest, I said to myself, this is the guy. This is what people want to hear. We're tired of all this stuff about the minutiae of policy. We just want to win. This is what Americans do. We win. Tell us what we need to do, and we'll get it done. So I predicted that he would win. So on election evening, my wife and I went down to Golden Hall in San Diego. We had been invited by my publicist, who's worked for years for a lot of Republican interests. And he said, you'll have fun, you know, come on down and check it out. And I'd never done it before. So we're in the auditorium, we're walking around, we're looking at they have all these stages set up with all of the media people, TV, radio, and they've got all the monitors up there, and they're documenting all the different races. It was actually pretty confusing, but it was very entertaining. And so we walked around, and there was a couple of DJs up there that are talk show hosts, Mike Slater and Brett Winterbull, guys I love. So I spent most of my time watching them. And I'll never forget the look on their face around 9 o'clock when they began to realize that Trump was going to do this. I mean, they stood up and they was looking over their laptops and they were looking at each other and they were throwing their arms up in the air and like, this can't be real. This is happening. And when we drove down there, my wife had said to me, you know, I'm really nervous. I said, about what? She said, I don't know if Trump can do this. And I said, well, honey, it's too late now. We're going to go down there, we're going to have fun, and whatever it is, it is. I wouldn't say I'm 100% confident, but I am. So we went down there and we watched it happen, and we went across the street to the Republican hotel room and mingled with all the guys in the $1,500 three-piece suits. It was a lot of fun. And so we came, right as I was leaving, my publicist tapped me on the back and says, hey, you gotta write another book. And I'm like, what? He goes, you were right. Trump's the president. You gotta write a follow-up. So on the way home, I said to my wife, you know, now what do I do? Writing books is hard. I mean, it takes a lot of time, research, and effort. And on the other hand, I don't really have anything else going on in my life, and I really enjoy doing this. And if it can help, if I can help influence people to think a little bit about what's going on in our world, then that's what I'm going to do. I don't have the money to write big checks for political parties and stuff like that. But what I can do is talk to people. And so this is why I decided to write Trump's Reckoning, bulldozing progressivism rebuilding America. So this book is based on the concept that Donald Trump is not a politician. He's a builder. That's what I am. Builders are different. They don't work the way politicians do. They have to have accountability with everything they do. They start by grading the land. Then they pour a foundation. They bring in subs to work for them. They vet the subs. They tell the subs exactly what's expected of them. And if they don't perform, you're fired. And they go right on up until the project is done. Every step of the way, they're accountable for their schedules and their budgets. That's the antithesis of what Washington does. They never are accountable for anything they do. They don't meet budgets. In fact, I think it's almost mandatory that they exceed their budgets. Or just completely forget about them altogether. So this is why I feel qualified to comment in my book on what you can expect for Donald Trump's administration. And to be honest with you, I think I nailed it. The first thing he did was take on fake news. And this is something that Republicans refuse to do. And as long as they were willing to ignore the fact that the news media was on the other side and was advocating for the other side, they were doomed. All of them. Doesn't matter if it was McCain or Romney or whoever it was. They could be the nicest guy in the world. They won all their previous campaigns, but they ain't gonna get to be the president as long as the fake news isn't challenged. Now, I'll also say this, and I said it in my book, I don't think Donald Trump knew what he was in for. I don't think he really understood how bad it is. Now, once you get into the office and you speak with the Secret Service and you get to know people in the FBI and you start to understand the challenges that our country is facing from threats from all over the world and from within, then I think he started to realize that he had a really tough job. But one of the things about being a builder is you never let opposition stop you, because you're always going to have opposition. I don't care where you're building, there's somebody that doesn't want you there. Like me and the guy in Escondido Country Club. There's always going to be resistance to building new things and changing things. And builders like Trump never let that stop them. And this is what I find, and I think one of the reasons his fans, his followers, his Trumpsters love him so much is because he's not going to roll over for anybody.
That's right.
And a lot of people say, well, he's crude. Well, you know, this is a crude world we live in. So if you can't live with that, you don't have much chance of being successful. And if you look at what he's done, which is what he promised he would do, in fact, how many guys would ever do what he did and tell everybody before he was elected who he was going to put on the Supreme Court, who he was going to appoint for his administration? Now, a lot of those people he subsequently fired, but that's because they didn't perform. You know, they just didn't deliver the goods. People ask me all the time when I'm doing radio interviews, you know, well, what do you think about this guy? He's constantly firing everybody and turning over his administration. Doesn't that show instability? I said, no, it's actually the opposite. It shows accountability. We need more of this, not less. So I think I kind of nailed the things that he was up against and what he was going to have to do. So during this time, I've been doing a lot of radio interviews, and one of the things that seems to be the most common question people ask me, or the most frustration they express, is why do so many of these intelligent people, Americans, embrace Marxism? Why do we have Dan Rather, or Brian Williams, or Jimmy Kimmel, or, I mean, just go down the list, Don Lemon, one after another? Why do all these people who are educated in the most advanced universities?
That's why. That's why. That's right.
But you have to wonder, and so this has been the most commonly asked question. And as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, you know what, this would be the subject of a really good book. Because I have a theory. So my theory about why these
Give
smart
him a Rice
people,
Krispie treat.
and we all know, I mean, I preach in the choir here if I talk about our schools or our indoctrination centers. But just like Trump coming into office, I'm not sure even we know how bad it is. Over the years, especially recently, we're starting, because of social media, and some of these people like Turning Point USA are exposing this. And it's frightening when you realize how indigenous and insidious this communist takeover is. And it is worldwide. So let me tell you what my theory is behind this. Do any of you have a friend, typically a woman, but it could be a man, who's involved in spousal abuse relationship? Anybody in here? Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it?
In the past. Yeah.
Okay, in the past. So, my wife and I recently went through this with one of her best friends, somebody she's known since high school. And we watched the relationship she had. They weren't married, but they were living together. But they were supposedly committed. And anyway, we thought they were nice guys. And we socialized with them quite a bit. And Kathy has known this gal for years and years and years. But she's noticed bruising. We witnessed him speak to her very disrespectfully and sometimes shove her. And so we started to ask questions and consider intervention. But I didn't think it was really our business. Sometimes you just have to stay out of it. And her girlfriend told her, don't worry about it, it'll work itself out. She kind of hinted that there was a problem, but she didn't admit it. A few months later, they left. They sold their house, and they moved away, and we've never heard from them since. Now, this was a longtime friend of my wife's. She's heartbroken. What happened to her friendship? This guy hijacked her. So I started looking into this, and I started reading, and I read a book by a Michigan researcher, Lisa Aronson Fontes, and her book is called Invisible Chains. She wanted to know why women, and like I said, it can be men, but it's commonly women, get involved in abusive relationships and can't get out. My wife had also had a fellow employee many years ago who had put a restraining order on her husband. And one day the guy came to the office and shot her to death. So we've had some experience with this. And anyway, so I read this book. And I'm telling you, it just, a light went off. The process that she coined as perspecticide, often referred to as gaslighting, is pernicious and persistent and widespread. And it's not just between couples. It's exactly what our students are going through in elementary school, in middle school, in high school, and in college. The basis of the success of this kind of hijacking of a person's personality and identity is the idea that you can control them for long periods of time. Now, where else are people under someone else's control for long periods of time except in our school system? Our public, government-run school system. So when you start to look at the curriculum of what these kids are being subjected to, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, 365 days a year, for 16 years, you'd have to ask yourself, why aren't they all Marxists? Because they're good students. And And this is what they're being taught. They're being told that America is the worst place on the planet, that we exert genocide on other countries, that we're racist, that we're bigots, that we're homophobes, that we destroy other countries, we destroy the world's resources, that we're allowing the planet to become extinct. Now think about how frightening that is to a kid. They're being told the world's only going to last for 10 more years, and it's Republicans' fault. Then, this is all affirmed by what I call, and I coined in my books, the Franken media. I really, Dan mentioned it earlier, I hate this stuff. You see these people on TV misuse the English language. There's nothing that makes me more angry. And what really bugs me is when we refer to the mainstream media. They're the farthest thing in the world from mainstream. But they want you to think they are, so I think they embrace that name. They encourage it. Because as far as they're concerned, they're mainstream. And all of us are extremists. So this is what they've done, is they've moved mainstream way over here to the left. And everybody else over here, even those Republicans that were kind of wishy-washy in the middle, now they're extremists too. So the Franken media reconfirms and affirms all of the things that a person who's exacting perspecticide or gaslighting another person does. And what they do is they isolate them, they control their information, they create an us versus them mentality. They take them away from their friends, their family, their church. They assault them with derision and demoralization. And then at the same time, they throw them a lot of adulation and adoration, which they withdraw when they feel they're losing control. So this is a psychological manipulation, or as I call it, a hijacking. They take away their identity and they substitute it with something else. And one of the things, if you've known somebody who's been in an abusive relationship, is that person over time will accept things they previously would never have done. Abortion. So they get pregnant, and previously to that, they told their husband or their boyfriend, I'll never have an abortion. Oh wow, guess what? Through perspecticide or gaslighting, they can convince them to get that abortion. But once you've done that to somebody, you've stolen their identity, you've stolen their soul. And if you look at the people now that are on the abortion side, the Planned Parenthood supporters, you got to ask yourself, what is wrong with these people? Well, they've had their identity stolen. They don't know right from wrong anymore. One of the problems we have in our school system is back in the 20s, we adopted the progressive educational theory. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but a couple of educators, John Dewey and John Rousseau, convinced the educational industry that using collaboration and less judgmentalism would allow kids to learn quicker. And during a few years of that becoming sort of the standardized curriculum in our schools, they added in existentialism. Does anybody know what existentialism means? Existentialism basically says you can be anything you want to be. Right and wrong is up to you. If you want to change genders, that's fine. So now we have this progressive curricula in all of our schools at all levels teaching existentialism, that you don't have to follow any rules, you don't have to adopt any values because you are the most smartest and the best educated person. So that's exactly what perspecticide does. It steals your values and then gives you this phony adulation that you're the smartest person in the world. This is the illusion of knowledge. And this is what I believe is what we're faced with, so pervasive in our society right now, is we have people that think they know how to think, but they've actually been taught not to think. Groupthink. They've adopted groupthink. So it's the mob mentality, it's follow the Pied Piper, it's whatever's popular at the time, and when you try to have a rational conversation with these people, perspecticide is the murder of rational perspective. You can't have that conversation with them because they don't have a rational perspective. So they'll end up throwing ad hominem attacks at you, at Donald Trump or whoever you're talking about at the time, because they don't really want to have a rational conversation and discuss things. But this is one of the most frustrating things I've confronted, is having conversations with my friends. Almost impossible now. People's kids go away to college and they come home and they're different than when they left. They've had their identity hijacked. And then it's confirmed and affirmed over and over and over by the entertainment industry, by the unions. Think about all the unions. All government employees are all union people. In California, half the people are union people. Maybe that explains why our situation is so messed up. Because these people have a vested interest in collectivism. So the whole concept of abuse, not only is it effective on an individual basis, but it can be incredibly effective on a mass basis. Mass perspecticide. I'll give you a couple examples. The People's Temple. You remember that? Jim Jones in Oakland had a little church, and he attracted mostly very liberal people who wanted to just live in peace. They were mostly a bunch of hippies. They wanted to have a little collective and grow their own food and share their artwork. And he ended up with 900 of them following him to Guyana because the government was coming after him, because he was abusing women within his group. He was an abuser. And over there, he convinced 900 people to murder their own children and themselves as an act of mercy. Now, if that isn't mass perspecticide, I don't know what is. Look at the people in North Korea. I don't know if you saw it, but PBS did a phenomenal documentary on it. And they interviewed families in North Korea. And these families are sycophants of Kim Jong-un and his family. They idolize them, even though they're living in houses with dirt floors and barely enough food to survive. That's mass perspecticide. So if I'm going to leave you with anything today about the whole purpose of writing this book and what I've tried to document in it, or at least explore, is that we have to be vigilant, and we have to question, and we have to challenge. And one of the ways we can do that is we can challenge newspapers. These newspaper editorialists, these op-ed boards, almost all of whom are graduates from major universities and extremely liberal Marxists. And they say things in their paper editorials that are just flat out wrong, that are biased, they're slanderous. Write a letter, challenge them. In my experience, sometimes it's hard to get it published because they don't really want opposition in their papers. But I think there's enough going on today with this challenge of fake news that you have to take your shot at it. And then spread that around amongst your friends on social media, email and Facebook and the other things that you do, but point out these fallacies, these false claims, this perspecticide and gaslighting that's going on day after day after day. We can't let this keep going, because this is, well, for example, I believe the progressives, you see these Hollywood stars and always pat themselves on the back, and I'm very progressive. Oh yeah, I'm going to vote for him because he's progressive. The progressivism is just the new modern day version of communism.
Amen.
They've just rebranded themselves because they can't afford to talk about being communists.
Right.
Because communists have been responsible for 100 million people being murdered in the last 100 years. So who's going to go around and say, yeah, I'm a communist. Yeah, he's a communist, yeah, I'll vote for him. No, they're not going to do that. So they've rebranded themselves. And these people are marketing experts. They know how to do this. So progressivism implies out front. It also implies that we're regressive. So I find that insulting. So that's how I challenge it. When you claim to be a progressive, let's talk about that. What is it that you want for our future that isn't authoritarian? Because this is what they want. But my feeling is that most of them have no clue what they're getting into. That like all the other countries that have been hijacked, Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ukraine, what happens is communists prey on people when they feel helpless. Now, how helpless have we felt recently? In my lifetime, I don't think I've ever seen Americans act so helpless since this COVID thing hit. Everybody is crawling under a rock and hiding. This is what communists feed on.
It is. Amen.
Helplessness. So let me paint you a little picture and I'll let you go home. How many of you have seen the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Yeah.
One of my favorite all-time movies. Jack Nicholson, Louise Fletcher, 6 Academy Award nominations. You know, emotional, heart-jerking movie with a lot of comedy, character development, fantastic film. So here's my take on it. Louise Fletcher was Nurse Ratched, right? And she ran this mental ward, and in there were a bunch of patients, all of whom had different mental conditions. And she would sit in the middle of the room, hand out drugs, in her white crest nurse's outfit with her hair perfectly coiffed. And sometimes these guys would object, and she would force them to show it on their tongue. And if they didn't follow her commands, she would punish them, take their cigarettes away from them, not allow them to play poker, or send them, worse yet, send them to shock therapy. She was a gaslighter. Exactly what she was doing. And all of these characters were sympathetic because we can all relate. We've known somebody like that, in fact, maybe even us. They all had these different issues, but they were very insecure. They were frightened. They were lonely. And I remember the one guy that she really brutally attacked because of his game, committed suicide. Perfect example of somebody who's a spousal abuser. So along comes this guy, Randall McMurphy. And he comes into the ward one day, and he's sort of a lightweight criminal. The judge had given him the option to go to a mental hospital or go to jail. He thought, that's easy, I'm going to the mental hospital, that'll be a piece of cake.
Okay.
So he waltzes in there and immediately starts entertaining all these guys, getting involved in playing cards, having a good time. And Nurse Ratchet's like, uh-oh, this guy's a disruptor. He's going to cause problems. Well, he's Donald Trump. And she's the Franken media. It's her job to maintain order in the ward. And it was his job to motivate those guys to think for themselves. Come on, guys, lighten up. Remember, he used to say, come on, lighten up. So they stole a bus and they went on a fishing trip. And they had the best time of their lives. And then when Nurse Ratched took vacation, they all got drunk. And Jack Nicholson was lobotomized. And there was one guy that quietly watched this whole thing. The chief. He never said a word. And we found out later, 2 things. That all those mental guys were in there voluntarily. They weren't sentenced to be there. They were there because that's where they wanted to be. And the chief, though he said, or never said, but he acted like he couldn't speak. He could speak. He just chose not to. And once Jack Nicholson, Randall McMurphy, was lobotomized, his heart was broken because he gave those other guys joy. So in order to put Jack out of his misery, he smothered him with a pillow, picked up the wash basin and threw it through the door and escaped. That's us. We're the chief. We're the silent majority.
Amen.
We need to escape.
Yes.
We can't let Nurse Ratched ruin us and our country.
That's right.
When he escaped, everybody in the theater cheered and stood up. That's America. That's what the chief represented in that movie. So, you know, I was going to tell you about a bunch of examples of people I know that, and you know, that are being gaslighted. Real quick. John Kasich. What happened to John Kasich? He was a stand-up conservative.
His father was a mailman.
He wanted to balance the budget. You know, he was anti-abortion. He was a good guy. What happened to him? Can anybody explain to me how he could possibly endorse a guy
Ego.
that is supporting BLM?
He was
supporting
lobotomized.
Planned Parenthood? How could he do that?
Right? He was right. He was right.
His family, I'm willing to bet, has been gaslighted. And they are gaslighting him.
What does that mean?
That's the only explanation.
Some of us don't know what gaslighting. Yeah, what does that mean? Like that?
It's perspecticide. It's what an abuser does to their partner. They isolate them. They keep them from getting actual information. They demoralize them. They terrorize them, intimidate them. But they also mix that in with adulation and adoration, which they withdraw when they want them to conform or do what they want them to do. So that's why these women get so addicted to their abusive partners. Give an example. Remember Nicole Simpson?
Yes.
Okay, so that goes way back. But Nicole Simpson used to call the police and say, "There goes OJ again, come over quick." And they'd get over there and she'd come to the door with two black eyes. And they'd say, "What do you want us to do? You want us to arrest him?" And she'd say, "No, it's just OJ. It's just up to it again." Well, they went like 8 times. And they'd say, "Well, why don't you want us to arrest him?" And she'd say, "Because I love him and he loves me." Well, this is a sick relationship. And what happens is the abuser hijacks that person's identity. So this is often referred to as gaslighting and or perspecticide. Perspecticide is kind of the clinical term. Gaslighting is kind of a pop term. You'll hear college kids and people like that refer to it all the time because they're going through it with their friends and their neighbors. And, you know, if they get off the liberal plantation, they get canceled. That's perspecticide. Exactly what perspecticide is. So, anyway, so, you know, I wonder, how in the world can you explain a guy like John Kasich? But I believe this theory explains it. That he's being tugged on by people in his family that have been gaslighted. They're younger. Well, look at some of the people even in Trump's family.
Oh, yeah.
They're not all on board. And that's partly because they've spent a great deal of their time listening to and being influenced by the Franken media. And, I look at it from this standpoint. I was just having a discussion with someone here a minute ago that, I feel terrible about these people that hate Trump because their lives are being ruined. Hatred is an insidious disease. It eats away at you and you become the victim. So I try to avoid that. I get upset by people, I get frustrated by them. My wife's mother spends all of her time in front of CNN, and every time she comes over to the house, well, she hasn't come over lately because she's locked down, but she would come over, and if I had TV on, if I had on Fox, she would start screaming, I hate that man, I hate Trump. And I looked at her one day, you know, and she's 85 years old. I don't want to show any disrespect, but I said, Bev, leave your hatred at the front door. We don't need that here. And I think this is what we have to do. We have to say to people, I'm not willing to put up with hatred. They're the ones who constantly talk to us about being haters.
Yes.
It's the other way around. You know it, I know it, we all know it. But that's exactly what Perspecticide does. Is it makes the victim feel like they're the problem. If you've ever known an abuser, he always says, she's the problem. That's what OJ said. So, I know we're all tired, and I want to bring this to the forefront because I think it's important for us to understand why the people that we confront that don't think like we do, think like they do. It's just like Ronald Reagan said, it's not that they're not intelligent, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. That's the illusion of knowledge. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Rich Elkin, ladies and gentlemen. 3 things. 3 things. When a